Have you guys ever wondered where Jesus came from? For a long time, grew up in church, didn't know any of this existed up until a couple years ago. That looking at people's records in the Bible, we're talking about ancient times. We're talking about lineage and ancestors and descendants, and I'm just who actually kept up with that? Is that oral also just orally mentioned? When you become of age, it's hey, you came from this line. I don't even know my line. Can you name the top 5 generations above you that came before you, your ancestors? I can name my dad and his dad. Past that, I'm lost. When I found out about them having the genealogy of Jesus, I was fascinated. When I first read it, I was like, wow, they actually have names of these people. And then later on, I was reading into some of those people that were mentioned, and I'm like, eye-opening. And I kind of want to touch on that. It's the opening verses of Matthew 1:1. And I'm going to pull it up here. So Matthew 1:1 talks about the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah. And there's a few names in there that I want to talk about. A few key characters in the Bible. And also, there's probably more in this list that I'd like to cover in a later video. But let's just get right in there. So Matthew 1:1. The ancestors of Jesus, the Messiah. This is the record of the ancestors of Jesus, the Messiah, a descendant of David and Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac was the father of Jacob. Jacob was the father of Judah and his brothers. Already the first 3 verses, pretty powerful. We're talking about the patriarchy of Islam, Judaism, Christianity. All of them look at Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We're going to be going through a bunch of names here. Sorry if I mispronounce a lot of them. But Abraham was father of our religion. He was the one that was promised that, descendants are going to come out of him. And he was the start of it all. Isaac was his son, that he was promised a seed, right? Even though he went against God and he had a child with his servant woman, Hagar, and they had a son named Ishmael. But God was like, you and your wife Sarai, which later on named Sarah, you guys are going to have a child. So then finally when that happened, they had Isaac and they banished Hagar and Ishmael, and which is a whole nother story on its own. But he had Isaac, and then Isaac had Jacob, which Jacob was then changed to Israel. So when you hear the son of Israel, that means the son of Jacob. Jacob, God changed his name to Israel, which means the one who wrestles with God. And the reason why is because he physically wrestled with God. It's kind of an interesting passage in the Bible, but he wrestled with God. And that kind of shows us the wrestle that the Israelites have with God. A lot of turning away, a lot of rebellion, a lot of moments that they need God, but they think that their way's better. Just like the rest of us. We are Israel in today's time. But let's continue. So verse 3. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab was the father of Nahshon. Nahshon was the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Now, Boaz and Rahab, big figures. When I first read this, I was like blown away. But Boaz, which is Rahab's son, eventually married Ruth, which comes from the book of Ruth, which is just a beautiful, poetic, just illustration of when you just want to play on the sideline, but God has a purpose for you. He's going to bring you in no matter what. And that could be you today. You could be on the sideline. You could be timid. You could be shy. You could just be like, I don't want to get in people's way and I don't want to lead anybody. I'm just going to be here. But God's going to pull you in the game. He's going to be like, fourth quarter, you're in. And it's like, I don't even got my shoes. It's like, you don't need shoes. I got you. And that's kind of the whole thing of Ruth. She followed her grandma to a foreign land, and then she kind of just was picking gardens, and some guys picking some, I forgot what it was, but it's in the book of Ruth. She was picking something in this garden, and then the guy came out and she was scared. She was like, hey, I'll put it back. And he's like, no, who are you? You know, little by little they started talking to each other, and he was like, no, you only come to my garden to pick. It's fine. They got married, had a kid, but let's continue. So we're on verse 5. Let me not forget Rahab. Rahab was a key figure in the entering of the promised land. In the book of Joshua, you know, we're looking right after Moses, right? Moses is the first 5 books, the law, the Torah. Then comes the 6th book of the Bible, which is Joshua. Joshua was a man of God. He was a leader. He was a warrior. But that book is a bloody book. And before they enter the promised land to take over all of the Canaanite nations and all the other Jebusites, Perizzites, Moabites, like before they did all of that, they went to go scout the land. Spies, Israelite spies. They went in and they stayed with a Gentile prostitute named Rahab, who was a Canaanite. She didn't have the same God as they did. And she was like, I don't want no trouble. Stay here. I'll keep you guys safe. And she kept her word. And they were like, hey, hang a scarlet scarf or fabric, I don't know, out your window the night that we siege and raid this place. And I'll tell my camp to not touch the house that has a scarlet hanging out the window. And then her family was the only one that was spared. Wasn't that crazy? Somebody that didn't even have the same God, didn't have the same vision, didn't have the same anything as these Israelites. They were foreigners they were foreign terrorists, basically, that were going to come here and overtake this land because God's will. And that woman, out of the 70,000 or whatever, I think at that point they had like 600,000 Israelites, you know, camping outside of the promised land. Out of all of those tribes or whatever, she was part of the line of Jesus. So that's another thing. If you feel like you are completely out of your realm, completely out of your element, Rahab had it much worse. A Gentile prostitute, not a Jew, not an Israelite, not even a believer, had part in the Messiah's coming. That was huge when I first heard about that. But we'll continue. So, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. That's what I told you. Boaz and Ruth got together. They had Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of King David. So, in the time of Jesse and David, the prophet Samuel came to them. there was the first king that was already on the throne. His name is Saul. And the prophet was like, he's kind of getting a little temperamental, getting a little dangerous. I think we might have to appoint a new king. So he had a vision from God. Go visit Jesse. It's going to be his son. So he's like, all right, let's go see what Jesse got. The prophet Samuel pulls up, and Samuel was a judge too. He was Israel's last judge. And he came to visit Jesse, and Jesse already had his boys out there. Like, they were fine wine. He was like, hey, which one? Who do you want to talk to? And there was older boys, more mature, more seasoned. I think they were like warriors at this point. And he was like, I don't think it's these. Do you have any other kids? And he was like, oh yeah, we got David, but don't worry about him. He's the youngest one. He's in the back, like tending to the sheep. He's our little shepherd. And then he was like, but these boys, they're ready for battle. Whatever you came here to ask for, they're ready for. Like, they're older, more mature. And he was like, take me to David. And then he saw David and talked to him. Saw his little sling, because that's how David would defend the sheep. He would ward off lions and whatever, coyotes and bears with this sling. And he saw it. He was like, this is the anointed one. So that's kind of like the story of David and Samuel and Jesse. Let's continue. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother was Bathsheba, the widow of Uriah. So David already had a wife at the time. Everybody knows this infamous story where he saw a woman taking a shower on her roof, and he went up there. He didn't go up there, but he kind of saw her, and he was already like, that's mine. And then found out that she was married to a man named Uriah, who was fighting David's war. And he sent Uriah to the front lines, where Uriah ended up dying, which was one of the carnal sins of David. And then what did David do? He swooped in, saw the widow, took her for himself, had a baby, and that's Solomon. So Solomon was born out of sin. Not only was he lusting after this girl, but he had her husband murdered. Terrible move, David. But that's where King Solomon came. And King Solomon, we know who he is. He's a big figure in the Bible. Wrote Proverbs, wrote Ecclesiastes, wrote some of the Psalms. He was coined as one of the wisest kings because he brought a lot of riches, a lot of conquering, him and David were huge. Obviously, they were the first kings out of the Davidic line. Let's continue. Solomon was the father of Rehoboam. Rehoboam was the father of Abijah. Abijah was the father of Asa. Asa was the father of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat was the father of Jehoram. Jehoram was the father of Uzziah. Uzziah was the father of Jotham. Jotham was the father of Ahaz. Ahaz was the father of Hezekiah. Hezekiah was the father of Manasseh. Manasseh was the father of Amon. Amon was the father of Josiah. Josiah was the father of Jehoiakim and his brothers, born at the time of the exile to Babylon. So you go over a lot of these people, right? These are all kings, right? Jehoshaphat was actually a good king, but he partnered with what we call like the Mad King, Ahab of Israel. A lot of these kings were recorded in the Book of Kings, and you can see a lot of their achievements, a lot of their, loyalty to God, and a lot of their fall. too. So I'm not going to go through any of them, but we might in a future video. But this is important right here. Verse 11. Born at the exile to Babylon. This is when the Babylonians came to Israel and sieged them and took them as slaves. Now we're living in Babylon. And a lot of prophets, a lot of books come out of that time that they were in Babylon. But let's continue. After the Babylonian exile, Jehoiakim was the father of Shealtiel. Shealtiel was the father of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel was the father of Abiud. Abiud was the father of Eliakim. Eliakim was the father of Azer. Azer was the father of Zadok. Zadok was the father of Achim. Achim was the father of Eliud. Eliud was the father of Eleazar. Eleazar was the father of Matan. Matan was the father of Jacob. Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. Mary gave birth to Jesus, who is called the Messiah. All those listed above include 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the Babylonian exile, and 14 from the Babylonian exile to the Messiah. Now, if you know anything about Scripture and the numbers that are mentioned, 7 is something everybody knows. It's the number of completion, perfection. And when people mention 7 times 7, it means like an infinite of perfection. So 14 generations, 7 plus 7, 14 to the line of David. And then another 14 of perfection to the Babylonian exile. And then 14 to the Messiah. So it's just interesting.